Do you believe that a wolf, a natural predator, could protect the life of a defenseless bear cub? In a wild world where the fight for survival dictates the rules, this true story seems impossible, but it happened. And what came next will leave you in shock. Get ready to immerse yourself in one of the most thrilling wildlife rescues ever recorded. One puppy in trouble, alone, vulnerable and surrounded by danger amid a brutal frozen landscape, and a mysterious wolf who did the unthinkable. This isn't just another story about animals. It's a story about instinct, unexpected connection, and a miracle of nature. Imagine an extreme environment where temperatures plummet below 40 degrees C, where any false step could be your last. It is in this scenario that everything happens. The little bear, separated from his mother after an intense storm in the wild region of Yukon, Canada, faces the biggest ordeal of his short life. Hungry, disoriented, and threatened by predators, the outcome seemed inevitable, until something completely out of the ordinary changed the course of this journey. Stories of bear rescues always touch us, but this one goes beyond all logic. We are not talking about a human interacting with or saving an animal, but rather a behavior never expected between rival species. This is where nature gives us a real lesson in compassion, something that we often cannot even see among humans. The wolf, which was supposed to represent danger, became that little being's only hope. What drove this wild animal to act as a guardian? The story was recorded by monitoring cameras installed by a team of local biologists who were perplexed by the images they received daily. For 3 days straight, the wolf was by the cub's side, warding off other predators, keeping him warm and even sharing leftover food. The scene that seemed like a story was pure reality in front of the lens. And don't think this is something common. Interspecies protection cases, especially among potential predators and prey, are extremely rare in nature, even more so in a hostile environment where each animal fights for itself. Therefore, this episode gained worldwide repercussion and sparked profound debates among scientists, environmentalists, and lovers of exciting animal stories. You are about to witness one of the most moving and intriguing stories ever told about the animal kingdom. A story that involves extreme rescue, maternal instinct, loss, overcoming, and an ending that no one could predict. The line between wild instinct and a gesture of protection has been crossed, and this makes us reflect on what it really means to care for others. But before proceeding, take a deep breath. What comes next is even more impressive. If this introduction has already moved you, keep watching, because the next few minutes will reveal the truth behind this act of animal compassion that defies all scientific explanations. This is more than a survival story. It's a lesson about life, about the unexpected, and about the power that exists in even the wildest instincts. The pup in trouble wasn't alone. But why? What made this wolf become the silent guardian of a life that wasn't his? That's what we're going to find out now. In the frozen expanse of Yukon, in the far north of Canada, life follows a hard and relentless pace. There, the boreal forest coexists with the frozen tundra, and the white snow mixes with the absolute silence of the mountains. It is a land where few dare to live, and where every animal, every step, every breath can mean the difference between life and death. It is in this hostile territory, where bears and wolves coexist in a fragile balance between dispute and respect, that this unbelievable story began. The year was 2017, when one of the most severe wildfire seasons hit the Yukon region, forcing bears, moose, and other wildlife to abandon their natural migratory routes in search of survival. Dense smoke invaded the icy sky, and the fire advanced ravenously, pushing wildlife into unknown, colder, and more dangerous areas. It was the silent chaos of nature out of balance. Fire, which seemed far from snow and ice, now invaded the habitat of those who had always trusted the ancient trails of instinct to find food, shelter, and protection. Bears, especially females with cubs, were most affected. Many were unable to escape in time. Others, in a desperate act, separated themselves from their children in an attempt to lose the predators or find shelter in a safe cave. The result has been an alarming increase in lonely, helpless cubs roaming freezing fields, confused and hungry, puppies in trouble, vulnerable to climate, hunger, and predators. And among these little ones, there was him, a little bear just a few weeks old, lost in the heart of the forest amid a sea of snow and silence. With the ground covered in a thick layer of ice and the winds cutting into his skin like invisible blades, this cub fought against time, temperature, and fear itself. Without her mother, without shelter, and without direction, her days seemed numbered. And it is at this point in history that nature, always surprising, offers us something that goes beyond any scientific explanation. A lone wolf appears. Yukon is home to intelligent, organized, territorial packs. Seeing a wolf alone outside of its pack is rare, but even rarer is what happened afterwards. The team of biologists from the Environmental Reserve near Kluane National Park, who had been monitoring the movement of fauna after the fires, were the ones who noticed something strange in the images captured by a camera installed near Lake Aishihik. It was a wolf, an adult male. He wasn't hunting, he didn't growl, it didn't surround the puppy, he just approached slowly. Cautious, yes, but with behavior that would never be expected from a predator. For hours, the wolf remained nearby, watching the little bear. At one point, he lay down a few meters away, and there it remained. There was no attack, there was no escape. Just two beings, separated by millions of years of instinct, sharing the same space. That night, the temperature dropped to 38 degrees, a cold that freezes life, freezes the bones. But somehow that wolf decided to stay, decided to protect. In the days that followed, the behavior was repeated. The images showed the wolf circling around the cub, fending off crows, foxes, and even other wolves that passed through the region. Yes, he defended him. And it wasn't for hours. It was 3 days. 3 days in which the natural world seemed to turn upside down, defying everything known about animal behavior. A wolf which should see the little bear as prey or, at the very least, as an intruder in its territory, chose to be its guard, its shelter, its company. And most impressively, he seemed to know that the cub needed more than protection. He would lie down next to him during the coldest nights, and there are visual records of moments when he brought pieces of carcass, hunting remains, and left them near the cub. A rare gesture. Instinctively, the wolf acted as a caretaker, and that made the world stop. The images were sent to research centers in Canada, the USA, and even to scholars in Norway and Russia, where wolf behavior has been studied for decades. The responses were almost unanimous. No one had ever seen anything like this. There were hypotheses. Perhaps the wolf had lost its own litter. Maybe he was too old to compete with the pack and had been kicked out. Maybe, just maybe, there was something there that can't be explained with data, but with feelings. A deeper impulse, more primitive, or more evolved. In Yukon, the region's indigenous people, such as the Tuchone and Kaska, believe that animals are ancestral spirits who appear to teach, protect, and guide. For them, the wolf was more than an animal. It was a sign, a guardian, a link between worlds. And indeed, in that moment, frozen in time, the impossible materialized in front of the cameras. He was no longer just a puppy in trouble. It was a miracle being recorded in real time. And this is where things start to get even more surprising, because what happened on the 4th day, when a rescue team finally arrived at the scene, not only sealed the cub's fate, but also revealed one of the most moving scenes ever witnessed in the wild. A scene that, even after being told and shown, still seems unbelievable. But before we continue with this breathtaking outcome, if your heart is heavy and your chest is full of emotion, it's because, like us, you understand the power that these stories have. So take the opportunity to subscribe here to the channel so you don't miss any of our real stories of survival, compassion, and wild instincts that defy everything we imagine. Now, take a deep breath, because what comes next will shake you even more. The little bear cub looked like a trembling shadow on the white ice. His steps were short, hesitant, sinking into the snow while the sharp wind blew as if trying to take away his last strength. His still thin and fragile fur was not enough to protect him from the brutal Yukon winter temperatures. He had lost his mother during a desperate escape caused by forest fires. which months earlier had taken over the region and pushed wildlife away from their habitats. Now, alone, hungry, and disoriented, this distressed cub became part of one of the most heartbreaking and incomprehensible stories ever seen in the wild. He wasn't crying, because bears don't cry like humans, but his eyes betrayed fear, cold, and emptiness. Eyes that searched for a direction, a known smell, a familiar sound. But there was only silence, the wind, and the creaking of frozen branches above his head. He wandered slowly, as if his instincts were taking him somewhere. Or like he was just trying to survive one more day, one more night. His name was never officially registered after all. He was never captured, microchipped, or tagged with a tracking collar. But the biologists who followed everything from a distance nicknamed him Kunik, a word from the Inuit dialect that means kiss of compassion, the gesture of touching with the nose, a sign of silent affection, a symbolic name for a being so fragile and at the same time so resilient. Kunik, despite being small, carried an ancestral strength in his eyes, a silent cry for help that didn't need language. And it is precisely when nature seemed to have no more answers to offer that it itself, in an enigmatic way, delivered a new character to the plot, a wolf. But not just any wolf. It was an immense animal with thick gray fur with dark spots on its legs and back and yellow eyes like a burning fire. He appeared in the images like a ghost. He appeared suddenly, coming from the forest at the end of the clearing where the cub was crawling. There were no signs of aggression. There was no rush. The wolf just watched, with that haughty posture, as if he understood the scene before him. And then, slowly, he approached. This wolf was never identified. No collar, no scars that differentiated him from others of his species. There is no record of similar behavior in the dozens of files already studied by animal behavior specialists. He was, for all intents and purposes, a mystery. An ancient spirit of the forest, as the region's elders would say, a silent guardian. And his presence there in front of a vulnerable bear cub was something that defied all rational explanations. Experts reviewed the images dozens of times. They compared it with other historical records. They looked for patterns. They looked for answers in their instincts. But no theory seemed sufficiently satisfactory. Why didn't he attack? Why did he stay there, night after night? What would motivate a wolf to risk its own safety to remain alongside an animal that, in other circumstances, could be a rival, or even prey? And even more, how to explain the gestures, the smooth movements, the protective posture, the way he walked around the little bear, as if making a living barrier against the outside world. In the research files, there were no precedents. In indigenous legends, however, there were parallels. Among the Tuchone, a native people who inhabit part of the Yukon territory, wolves are believed to be spiritual messengers, capable of sensing pain and injustice, and who sometimes appear to guide the vulnerable. To them, this wasn't just a random encounter. It was a reunion of souls, a mission. And this connection between the two characters grew visibly with each image recorded. Kunik, the bear cub, didn't run. He didn't even back down. After the first night they were close, the little one was already more stable, less shaky. There were records of a particularly touching moment, when the wolf lay down on the snow and the cub, with difficulty, approached and settled down next to him, touching his side with his nose. It was as if, in that silent gesture, they both knew they were together for a reason that transcended logic. The wolf, which scholars called the spirit of Aklak, a reference to the Inuit word for bear, seemed not only to care for the cub, but to protect something that was above any biological need. He remained alert, listened to every sound around him, sniffed the wind constantly, and did not move more than a few meters away from Kunik. It was as if that little bear had become his purpose. Your last commitment to wildlife, his last act of compassion, or perhaps his redemption. During the 3 days of silent vigil, cameras captured other visitors, a couple of foxes crossing in the distance, a younger wolf approaching and being pushed away with a firm growl, and even a king vulture circling the sky. But no one touched Kunik. No one dared cross the limit imposed by the wolf. It was as if there was an invisible force field there, powered by a silent pact between two creatures who shouldn't be together, but were. And they were for a reason. This unlikely link began to spark not only scientific interest, but also a stir on social media as images began to leak outside the academic circuit. People commented, "It's like a foster mother from nature." Others said, "This wolf is teaching humanity." And the comments didn't stop. Because when compassion springs up in the most unlikely place, it hits deep. And that's exactly what was happening. An emotional connection between predator and prey, between abandonment and acceptance, between the world's pain and nature's response. And the most curious thing is that the more the images progressed, the more the puppy's behavior changed. Kunik was now able to stand up more firmly. His breathing was stronger, his walk more determined. It was as if that brief time of protection had given him a new chance, and at the same time, the wolf seemed to be preparing for something, as if he knew his role there was coming to an end. But no one was prepared for what would happen on the fourth day, the day a human team finally entered the forest to intervene. And that's exactly where the story takes an even more impressive turn. The darkness of the forest on the fourth day seemed thicker than ever. The overcast sky did not allow the moon's light to touch the ground, and the wind howled through the twisted trees, as if it wanted to erase any trace of hope that still remained in that icy corner of Yukon. It was the kind of night that few animals can endure, the kind of cold that paralyzes muscles, numbs senses, and turns every breath into a silent battle for survival. In that frozen scenario, little Kunik, already exhausted by hunger and accumulated fatigue, trembled like a leaf about to come loose from its branch. His puny body, wrapped in still fine, damp fur, was not prepared to face temperatures approaching 40 degrees size. Hunger was eating him up inside. It had been days since he had eaten anything solid. The few movements he could make were slow, as if his bones were growing heavier with each passing hour. His sense of smell, once acute, no longer distinguished the scent of the wolf that was watching him from the cold breeze that blew from the forest. Kunik was on the verge of collapse, physically and emotionally. And yet, he was not alone. The wolf, always there, firm as a protective shadow, remained close, attentive to every noise, every whisper of the forest. But on this particular night, the tension seemed to hang in the air like an invisible weight. There was movement all around. Other presences. The surveillance camera captured the approach of 3 large figures in the distance, adult bears, and they weren't related. The behavior indicated competition. They smelled the air, sniffed the tracks. They were hungry. The distressed cub now became an easy target, a vulnerable obstacle in a merciless food chain. And there, the real conflict began. The wolf positioned itself between Kunik and the trio. His ears were lowered, his hair was standing on end, his body was stiff. It was as if, in that instant, he became the only shield between the little bear and certain death. There was no direct attack, but the clash of looks, the guttural sounds, the territorial signs, made it clear that the risk was imminent. Nature had gone into contest mode. Wildlife shows no mercy, and the cold only amplifies the cruelest instincts. Kunik could barely lift his head, but he could feel the tension in the air. His body was shaking, not just from the cold, but from something deeper. Fear, the instinctive fear of knowing they were vulnerable, of knowing that the only being who had shown care up until that point might have to face them, or leave them. And there was the height of the conflict, the dilemma between the wolf's instinct for self-preservation and the inexplicable connection he had established with that cub of another species. As the tension escalated, the cameras showed the wolf taking small steps forward, as if drawing an invisible boundary on the ground. And surprisingly, the adult bears didn't challenge him directly. Maybe it was posture, size, or something more subtle. Respect. Respect for the one he dared to protect even though he knew he wasn't his child, that there was no blood bond, that there was no obligation whatsoever. But the forest does not forgive weakness, and hunger does not wait for emotional decisions. Time passed and Kunik weakened, Every additional hour without food was a sentence. And the wolf knew. He smelled the decay of the small body, the smell of exhaustion, of almost giving up. And yet he stayed. He refused to give up. It was at that critical point, at that moment where everything seemed to tip towards tragedy, that a distant sound broke the night. A mechanical, muffled, rhythmic sound. Something different from the forest soundtrack. They were human steps. The rescue team, after days of intense monitoring and logistical planning, had finally managed to cross the dangerous terrain and reach the clearing. But they didn't know what they would find. They didn't know about the wolf's presence. And that, in itself, was another risk. The dilemma was now different. How to get closer? How to rescue the puppy without provoking the wolf? How to save a life without putting others at risk? It was sacred territory they were about to cross. A silent pact between species had been established there, and any human interference could break this delicate balance. The team, equipped with long-range cameras and tranquilizers, chose to wait. They watched for hours. They recorded the behaviors, and what they saw left them perplexed. In a moment of absolute silence, the wolf licked Kunik's forehead as if to say goodbye. A simple gesture, but full of indescribable symbolism. A final touch of care before the inevitable. It was as if he knew help was coming, as if he understood that his mission there had been accomplished. And then, without fuss, without running, the wolf walked away. He disappeared among the trees, like a spirit returning to its world after fulfilling a greater purpose. The humans entered, collected Kunik with extreme care and took him to the rehabilitation base. But that moment, that extreme conflict between death and life, between instinct and compassion, had left deep marks on everyone who witnessed it. If you've made it this far, feeling every detail of this unbelievable journey, leave a comment with the word strength, because that's what this story is about. The strength that is born in the most unlikely places. The strength of instinct, survival, the connection between species, and above all, the strength that exists when nature teaches us a lesson about empathy. The image that appeared on the monitoring base's screens looked more like an illustration from a story than a record of wildlife, but it was real, clearly visible, even in the challenging conditions of snow and low light, was the wolf. That same animal feared by many, a symbol of brute strength and a natural predator. But in that scene, he didn't chase, he didn't surround, he didn't threaten. He was lying down, with the body semi-bent, wrapped in thick gray fur stained with white, breathing slowly next to the bear cub. Kunik, exhausted and vulnerable, had approached the wolf as if seeking not just warmth but protection. And the wolf allowed it. This attitude contradicted centuries of behavioral records, countless scientific articles, and the very logic of the food chain. What was happening in that icy clearing was more than instinct. It was compassion. The researchers, even though they are used to nature's surprises, remained silent for long minutes while watching those images. There was something deeply symbolic and emotional about that gesture. The predator and the prey, lying side by side, in the middle of a scenario of extreme danger, forming a silent alliance against the cold, hunger, and predators. And this scene was not isolated. For 3 whole days, the cameras recorded behavior that none of the professionals expected to see. The wolf didn't just stay close. He cared. With each of Kunik's movements, he stood up, alert. When the little one trembled, the wolf came closer. When crows and other animals approached curiously, he growled softly, firmly, until they moved away. He didn't let anyone get close. It was as if he had adopted the role of guardian, a guardian from the most unlikely place. One wolf-shaped protector, where many would expect to find only threat. On the second night, something even stronger happened. Kunik, who until then had only approached the wolf cautiously, was recorded snuggling against its chest. It fit between the animal's front legs as if that place were its natural shelter, and the wolf didn't just accept it. He wrapped his body around the cub, like a mother protecting her child during a storm. And it was a storm that enveloped them. Blizzard, piercing wind, and an entire forest in silence, watching the unlikely happen. Their breathing formed small clouds in the air, rhythmic, almost in sync. Thermal cameras showed that the temperature around Kunik rose a few degrees whenever he was touching the wolf. This may have been what literally kept him alive during the cruelest of dawns. The bear cub's life was undoubtedly hanging in the balance. But the wolf held that thread firmly, without anyone understanding why. And the most striking thing of all was the wolf's gaze. It was hard to explain in words, but there was something there. Something that wasn't simply animal. He didn't seem to act on impulse or a rehearsed behavior of nature. He seemed to know, to understand, to choose. His eyes followed the cub's movements with almost human care. There was no rush, there was no tension, there was no fear, just presence. A presence that spoke louder than any growl, than any predatory instinct. Some animal behavior experts have tried to formulate hypotheses. Have there been any recent losses of puppies in the pack? Could the wolf be in mourning, projecting onto the little bear a symbolic chance to care, to reconnect with the role of protector? Or perhaps he was old, separated from the group, and found in the cub a reason to stay. A few more days? No explanation was definitive. No theory could account for what the eyes registered so clearly. The scene touched a deeper place than academic studies reached, a place we call emotional instinct, that invisible force that drives us to care even when we don't understand why. This reversal of roles affected everyone who followed the case. The internet, fed by images captured by automatic cameras, exploded with comments. People from all over the world shared their interpretations. Some saw a spiritual message there. Others a metaphor for what humanity had forgotten, that even in the wildest nature, empathy can emerge. That even among predators there is room for care. And the wolf stayed there, firm, property many times, security guard and many others. He seemed to ignore the world around him, focused only on that little life that for some reason only he knew deserved to be protected. It was as if, during those days, he had stopped being just a wolf. It had turned into something bigger, in a symbol. A lighthouse in the midst of chaos, a living lesson. On the third day, something changed. Kunik was now moving more steadily, still fragile, but with more conscious steps. His look was no longer the same. There was less fear, more presence. And the wolf. The wolf seemed to realize this. He began to move away for short periods, as if testing the cub's endurance. Like a caregiver who teaches a child to walk alone. There was no abandonment, just space. A necessary space. And at the same time, deeply painful. Because everyone there knew that the moment of separation was approaching. That soon, very soon, humans would intervene. That Kunik would be taken. That chapter, that miracle of nature, was about to close. But the wolf, as if feeling all this, showed no resistance. It just remained, by far, observing. As if he wanted to guarantee that everything would work out, that the little bear in trouble would live, that his mission was almost accomplished. If this part of the story touched your heart, write light here in the comments. Because even in the darkest places, nature still turns on little lights that remind us of what is essential, caring, even when the whole world expects otherwise. The question hung in the air, repeated in hushed tones by biologists, echoed on internet forums and whispered even by local tribal elders. Why would a wolf protect a bear cub? The logic of nature seemed to have been turned inside out in that icy Yukon clearing. Animal behavior specialists analyzed hours of images, trying to interpret each gesture, each approach, each look between the two. The scientific world was looking for an explanation, a rational justification for behavior that, at first glance, bordered on the impossible. But the more you watched, the more you studied, the more questions arose, and the fewer answers. Some researchers suggested that the wolf had lost its own cub months earlier. According to reports from the team monitoring the region, previous thermal records showed a wolf with 2 cubs during the spring. But in July of that same year, he began to roam alone. There were no more signs of the little ones. No one knew whether they had been taken by predators, became sick, or simply lost. But there was something about that wolf, a certain melancholy in his demeanor, a more shuffling gait, a more distant presence than was common for a male his age. Perhaps in that absence an empty space opened up, and when Kunik appeared, small, fragile, full of fear, something inside that wolf responded. The transfer of care theory has gained traction. For the more pragmatic scientists, this was redirected instinct, a protective behavior activated by a previous trauma. The wolf saw in the bear cub an unconscious chance to repeat the role he had lost, but there were others who disagreed. Ethology experts pointed out that biologically, such complex behavior between unrelated species was extremely rare, almost non-existent. The initial approach could even be explained by curiosity, but the continued care, active protection, the sharing of body heat and even food, this went beyond any protocol recorded in previous research, and it was then that deeper theories began to gain ground. Not in universities, perhaps, but among those who live in direct contact with the land. The indigenous peoples of Yukon, especially the Tuchone and Kaska, were not surprised by what happened. For them, wolves have always been more than animals. They are guardians, ancestral spirits that cross the world of the living to protect the vulnerable, to carry out silent missions that escape rational understanding. In their legends, there are records of wolves who guided lost hunters, who braved storms to protect children, and who appear in life's darkest moments to offer light. In one of these stories passed down from generation to generation, a lone wolf appears before a child who had lost his way from the village. He leads her through frozen forests, scares away predators, offers warmth on cold nights, and disappears as soon as she finds her way back. When the elders heard about Kunik and the protective wolf, they immediately recognized the pattern of the old legend. They said that this type of meeting was no coincidence. It was destiny. It was a connection between souls of different species, united by something that science still cannot name, but that hearts feel when they see it. And it wasn't just local people who felt this energy. The commotion that took over the internet reflected exactly this collective feeling of something bigger. Thousands of comments from different parts of the world expressed the same feeling, that the scene was not just beautiful, it was spiritual. People who had never been moved by nature videos reported crying, goosebumps, and an inexplicable feeling of peace, as if that wolf was reminding us, in the midst of chaos, that there is still hope, that even among predators, even in the most extreme conditions, there is still room for compassion. Some scholars of animistic cultures have brought another perspective. In several ancestral beliefs around the world, such as among the people of Siberia, Greenland, and even Japan, wolves are believed to carry the wisdom of the forest gods. They are messengers, bringers of balance, and that when something in the world is in disorder, like fires, climate imbalances, habitat destruction, they show up to restore what was broken. And what could be more broken than a bear cub separated from its mother, lost in the cold, in the middle of a planet that burns its own roots? This theory gains even more strength when we remember the context. The fire that expelled Kunik from the den, the destruction of the trails that maintained the natural balance, the presence of predators unbalanced by hunger and displacement. In the midst of all this, a wolf appears who breaks the codes of nature and becomes a caretaker. An anomaly, perhaps, but for many a sign, a reminder that even in chaos there is beauty, there is order, and there is mystery. There are still those who believe that the wolf felt something that humans cannot capture, a frequency, a vibration, a primitive empathy. That he knew without needing to think that that little bear deserved to live, that, somewhere deep, he recognized in him a pain similar to his own. Because maybe, just maybe, even wolves know what it's like to lose, and what it's like to find something to love again. And as these theories spread, gaining shape and strength, the world stopped to watch. Images spread across the networks, debates raged, but nothing, absolutely nothing, could explain precisely what had happened in that icy clearing. And perhaps that's exactly where the magic of this story lies, in the fact that it doesn't need to be understood, just felt. If you felt this connection, if this story awakened something in you, leave a like in this video right now. Because sometimes, a simple gesture of support is all we need to keep spreading stories that remind us of who we really are. The fourth day dawned with a different silence. It wasn't the usual silence of the snow-covered forest, that muffled sound of footsteps on ice, or the distant whisper of branches swaying in the wind. It was a charged silence, almost ceremonial, as if nature itself had fallen silent to witness a moment that was unusual, not just for humans, but for the wild world itself. The biologists had approached slowly, guided by the exact coordinates sent by the monitoring system. They knew exactly where the cub was, and they also knew about the presence of the wolf. They had spent the last few hours debating strategies, considering the risks, and even hesitating. No one wanted to interfere with such a fragile balance. But the cub's health was deteriorating. Despite the wolf's care, Kunik needed specialized treatment, reinforced nutrition, exams, care that only a human team could provide. When the researchers' first stepped onto the edge of the clearing, the wolf's attentive eyes were already following them. He didn't growl. He didn't back down. It didn't make any progress either. He was sitting on the snow, his posture erect, like a sentry. He observed everything, but did not show aggression. His gaze, still filled with the same intensity as the previous days, now seemed more calm, as if he already knew, as if he expected it. Kunik, lying a few meters away, raised his head with difficulty. He tried to get up, but his paws were still weak. Even so, a low, soft sound came from his throat. It wasn't a lament. It was like a calling. And the wolf, when he heard it, stood up. He didn't run to the cub. He didn't try to protect him. He just walked towards her, slowly, approaching him one last time. He placed his nose against Kunik's neck, as he had done on previous nights, and remained there for a few seconds. A silent gesture of farewell. The biologists, watching the scene, remained static. No one dared to interrupt that moment. There, in that instant frozen in time, there were no humans or animals. There were no observers, and observed. There were only two lives connected by something invisible, profound, impossible to label. It was as if that wolf had understood the language of pain, loss, and hope. As if he had been sent to fill a void, to protect an innocent. And now, he could leave. And that's what he did. After that last touch, the wolf moved away. Slowly, as if to ensure that each step would not cause alarm. He didn't look back. It didn't run either. He walked with the dignity of someone who fulfilled a purpose. From someone who knew that time in that place had ended. And then he disappeared into the snow-covered trees, disappearing as he had appeared, silently, like an ancient spirit returning to the forest that shaped him. The biologists approached carefully. Kunik couldn't resist. He was weak, but alive. His eyes still followed the direction where the wolf had left, as if he expected him to return, even though he knew he wouldn't. And that look remained in the memory of everyone present. A look that carried longing even before the separation, who understood silently that that bond had been unique. And now it was time to move on. Using specific techniques and extreme delicacy, the puppy was placed in a thermal transport box, where he received immediate heating and intravenous hydration. Even during transport, his body temperature began to rise, and the first signs of improvement began to appear. But the clinical part, as important as it was not what affected those involved most. It was what was left behind. That space in the snow, marked by the footprints of two very different beings, is now empty. The clearing had fallen silent, but something had changed forever. The team left the place feeling like they had witnessed something sacred. Many of the professionals, experienced in rescues, with decades in the field, had never witnessed anything similar. And it wasn't just about the cub's survival. It was about what it said about life, about bonds that defy species, instincts, and logic, about the presence of the improbable in the midst of chaos, about a wolf who, even without words, taught more about empathy than any book or study. In the following days, the video of the rescue was published in a scientific bulletin, but quickly went viral on social media. People from all over the world were moved by the story. Artists created illustrations. Children sent letters to the organizations involved. Many said it was the most beautiful story they had ever seen. Others claimed to have cried like never before. And there was unanimity in the comments. That wolf was not common. He was different. He was needed. And the image of him standing in the snow, watching from afar as the cub was rescued, became a symbol of compassion. Be careful, farewell, and also acceptance. Because in that final gesture, in that silence that said more than 1,000 roars, he reminded us of something fundamental. Sometimes, the greatest form of love is knowing when to let go. If this moment touched your soul in any way, like this video right now, it's just one click, but it helps immensely to move this story forward and show that yes, even in the coldest forests, there is still warmth between beings. And you, who followed every detail until now, are part of this. The days that followed little Kunik's rescue were not silent like the forest he had left. Quite the opposite. It was as if the entire world had suddenly stopped to listen to what that story was saying. It was enough for the first images to be released by one of the rescue team members for social media to go into overdrive. Within hours, videos, prints, and reports took over the internet. Millions of people began to share the story with emotionally charged comments. This proves that the world still has salvation. If even a wolf can protect a defenseless cub, why can't we do the same? There were phrases that were repeated, as if somehow the wolf's attitude had touched an exposed nerve in humanity. In a scenario where the most frequent news revolves around the destruction of the environment, the suffering of animals, abandonment, the lack of compassion, that story seemed like a ray of light crossing a gray landscape, and that had a powerful effect. People wanted to know more. They wanted to understand every detail. They wanted to see all the images possible. And above all, they wanted to feel that pure emotion again, that many no longer knew they were looking for. The story of Kunik and the wolf became a report. It made the covers of newspapers, featured on news portals, and featured in documentaries about animal behavior. Influencers, activists, and celebrities spoke out. Letters began to arrive at the reservation. Children from schools in Canada and the United States drew the two together, the bear and the wolf, on colored pages with hearts around them. A French artist even painted a mural in an art school in Lyon with the image of the two lying in the snow, a symbol of unexpected love between species that normally would never share the same space in peace. But it wasn't all celebration. Along with the global commotion also came criticism, and she was tough. A wave of outrage began to form on social media, as soon as some users realized that the rescue had taken days. Why did they wait so long to act? How could they see a bear cub in trouble and not rush to save it? If the wolf had left sooner, that cub would have died. Messages began to accumulate on the profiles of the natural reserve responsible for monitoring, and the situation quickly got out of control. The emotional tone gave way to demands, anger, frustration. The reserve team, made up of serious professionals, experienced biologists, and animal behavior scholars, was forced to respond. In an official note, they explained that the place where the cub was found was extremely remote, difficult to access, and that the entire region had been affected by recent forest fires, which compromised trails, radio communication, and even the safety of the humans involved. They didn't want to risk a hasty entry, which could put both the cub and the wolf, and even the team, at risk. Furthermore, there was another more delicate factor that few understood outside the field biology universe. Human interference, even when motivated by good intentions, can break essential natural dynamics. The wolf's protective behavior was something absolutely out of the ordinary. Entering the clearing aggressively or at an inopportune moment could have interrupted this bond, scared the wolf, or even provoked an unpredictable reaction. Therefore, the choice was to observe, analyze, and act at the right time, which, in fact, allowed the rescue to be successful. But for a large part of the public, these justifications were not enough. In times of immediacy, where the expectation is for an instant response, the idea of waiting seemed cruel. The commotion gave way to debate. Experts began to be interviewed. Animal protection organizations have published contradictory analyses. Some supported the reserve's conduct, recognizing the complexity of the case. Others questioned the limit between ethics and passivity. And in the midst of all this, the figure of the wolf, previously a symbol of compassion, began to be used as an argument in discussions about humanity itself. The wolf did what many humans would not do. This phrase began to appear in hundreds of posts, in emotional videos, and opinion articles. It became an uncomfortable mirror. While the wolf acted out of instinct, care, and empathy, we, humans, with all our technology, science, and consciousness, seemed to hesitate. We seemed distant, bureaucratic, slow. And that, for many, was the true emotional turning point of the story. The social outcry grew so much that the reserve had to change its communication policy. They created a specific channel to answer questions, published behind-the-scenes details of the rescue, and explained in detail each decision made. They showed how, even with all the desire to act quickly, the environmental context and the integrity of those involved required extreme caution. And over time, the emotional dust began to settle. But history had already left its mark. More than the rescue of a bear cub, more than the unusual behavior of a wild wolf, what the world saw was a mirror. A reflection of what still moves us, what we still hope to see. Compassion, care, the instinct to protect, even when there is nothing to gain from it. And at the same time, we saw our flaws, our slowness, our difficulty in acting with the same pure instinct as someone who simply feels and responds. This mix of charm and frustration made the story even more powerful, more real, more human, even though, ironically, it stars two wild animals. And it didn't end there. Because what happened next? Well, that was also something no one expected. If this moment made you reflect on what really matters, share your vision in the comments. But if you felt something profound reading all of this so far, leave your support with a like. This helps more than you know to keep alive the stories that can still touch the hearts of the world. Months have passed since that remarkable day. Kunik, the little bear cub who was once on the verge of death, sheltered in the unlikely arms of a wild wolf, was now no longer that fragile and defenseless being that had moved the world. Little by little, under the attentive care of the rehabilitation team, he gained weight, strength, and confidence. Every step I took into the recovery reserve was a silent victory. Every curious gesture, every nibble on the fresh fruit offered, every time he raised himself on his hind legs to reach something high, it was as if he left behind the echoes of pain and gradually embraced the life that had been given back to him. The veterinarians followed everything with attentive eyes and involved hearts. No one there could remain emotionally distant. It was impossible. Kunik had something different, not just because of its history, but because of what it represented. A symbol of overcoming, of resilience. A reflection that, even in extreme scenarios where everything seems lost, there is still a chance of rebirth. And every glance he cast, every moment he stopped and observed the sky or the sound of the forest around him, it was as if he was searching for something, or someone. The team avoided using terms like humanized or domesticated. They knew that the objective was always one: reintroduction to nature. And to do that, Kunik needed to be a bear again. He needed to relearn how to live in his world, with its rules, its smells, its cycles. Therefore, the process was carried out with great care. Gradually, he was moved to a transition area, a large protected nature reserve with limited human access where other recovering bears also lived. There, Kunik began to interact with others of his species, first with hesitation, then with more confidence. Zuni was learning how to climb trees, dig for roots, identify signs of danger, and most of all, how to stand his ground, even alone. And then the day arrived. The day the team finally decided Kunik was ready, strong enough, healthy, with all vital signs in perfect balance. The decision was unanimous, but the moment was heavy. There were tears in the eyes of the biologists, on the faces of the caregivers who had been with him from the beginning. It wasn't just the release of an animal into its natural habitat. It was the end of a cycle marked by pain, miracle, love, and hope. Kunik was transported to a safe, remote area, carefully selected based on records of bear population density and food availability. When the cage was opened, he hesitated for a moment, felt the air. He looked around. He sniffed the floor. And then, with one last look back, the kind of look that chills even the most skeptical of hearts, he walked into the forest. No rush, no fear, as if I were coming home. And as Kunik reconstructed his story, the question remained, what about the wolf? Since the day of his rescue, no one has seen him again. Not even the cameras caught it. No tracks, no signs, no footprints. He disappeared as he had appeared, into silence, no fuss, no warning. And this absence, far from being forgotten, only strengthened what many already felt. That wolf was not just an animal. It was something bigger. He was a silent guardian of the forest. The legends of the Tuchon and Kaska peoples gained strength again. They said that the spirits of nature, when they realize that a life still has a path, choose ways to intervene. Sometimes a wind that changes the direction of the flames. Other times, a tree that falls at the right time. And, every now and then, a wolf. A being that appears from nowhere, protects the fragile, and leaves when its mission is accomplished. For them, this wolf had a spiritual name. It was Tundranak, he who walks between worlds. A being of ancient wisdom, who speaks out to remind you that even in the unforgiving rules of nature, there is still compassion. And perhaps that's why the wolf's disappearance wasn't felt as a loss, but as closure. He did not need to be physically present to continue existing. It now inhabited another form, in the drawings made by children, in the murals painted on the walls of schools, in the tattoos that some people began to get with the image of the wolf and the bear side by side. He was in the memory of every person who watched the story, cried with it, shared it, commented. It was alive in every conversation that started with, "Did you see what that wolf did?" For the rescue team, the impact was profound. Many said that that event changed their way of seeing nature. Others said they felt a calling to keep fighting for stories like this, where wildlife shows us that instincts are not as cold as we think. That even in a hostile, frozen territory, marked by environmental tragedies and scarcity, there is room for something that can only be called a miracle. And Kunik lives. The latest records show a young, strong bear, confidently exploring the forest, sniffing out new territories, digging firmly into the earth. He carries an invisible mark within him, something that cannot be seen, but felt. As if his every step reminded the world of what happened. As if every tree he climbs, every fish he hunts, every winter he survives, is a silent thank you to the wolf who one day chose not to attack. If this outcome sparked something inside you, leave your support with a simple gesture, a heart in the comments. Just that, a heart that says, without words, that you felt what this story meant. Because sometimes all the world needs is someone who continues to believe in the power of caring. Sometimes all we need is to remember that there are still pure gestures, even in the most unlikely places. That life, despite being hard, still holds inexplicable encounters, like that of a lost bear cub and a wolf that, instead of attacking, chose to protect. This wasn't just a story about instinct, about survival. It was a story about love, empathy, connection. A reminder that compassion has no species, language, or reason. It just happens when you need it most, when you least expect it. Maybe today, you needed to hear something like this, feeling that there is still beauty in the world, that kindness still exists, even in the form of paws and snouts, that even in the silence of the frozen forest there is warmth, there is hope. Did you feel something special about this video like I did? If this story touched your heart and made you breathe deeper, if it rekindled in you a spark of faith in humanity, and also in nature, then I invite you, from the bottom of my heart, to continue this journey with us. Subscribe to the channel now, because here each story is a reminder that the impossible can happen. The next video is already there on the screen, waiting for you, and it also contains something magical which might transform your day. And tell me in the comments, how did this story move you? Use words that come from your soul or just write "I felt." That says it all. You are part of this. And it's because of people like you that stories like this continue to be told. Until the next video. And never forget, there is more goodness in the world than it seems. Sometimes it comes with teeth and claws, but also with a soul,